Hello and welcome back. I'm your host, Ada Death Dolly, and tonight I'm bringing you what will likely be the conclusion of what I had planned to be a larger series, but due to considerations for both the living and the dead, we're not going to cover certain things. I had an old episode planned which would cover some of the more stranger things of Tamlyn's life. But, I guess those of us who knew him most intimately know that story, and perhaps it's not for me to tell, after all. I'd agonized over this, and I talked at great length with my wife about this. And after weeks of consideration, I decided one of the more disturbing aspects should be left between those who were there. So, and I apologize for kind of leaving this hanging for almost a whole month, but you have to understand, I had just lost Roz, and a lot of people in my world had things just kind of collapsed after Roz Williams had passed away, and people got between me and Shaitan. My marriage to Johnny Cancer had completely disintegrated, and it was kaput, and we had separated for the final time until we could finally get divorced. Battles over our children, a lot of personal anguish took place in that time period. Of course, this was the late 90s, excuse me. Starting at 1998, a few months after Roz had passed, Tamlyn had come into my life, and well, I did have my good friend Demi, who was, I often referred to him as my henchman. We had a strange little tension because, well, I'm going in one direction and on hormones, and well, he was a little on the spectrum and kind of intense himself. Mind you, I'm still good friends with him. And yeah, I could have done him a little better. I see it done for me. But Tamlyn, I don't know. I didn't intentionally make this friendship to fill the void that Roz left. It just kind of materialized in that way because Tamlyn was like Demi. He was there a lot, but unlike Demi, he didn't annoy the shit out of me sometimes. Tamlyn could, just be himself. He was one of those good Southern boys that wasn't a racist. He was actually a rocker who was very talented in both sound engineering, which he used in animation, most notably in Ren and Stimpy, and lastly the Ripping Friends. I don't know if he did any more work in that regard after we stopped talking. But I'm going to cover the time period from mid to late 1998 to, or is it actually more like 1999? Well, it's around 1998, 99. And we stayed friends until maybe 2000, I want to say 2000, May of 2003 was it. We had a big blow up and that was it. But what led to all these blow ups? Because Tamlyn was very docile. He wasn't a person who liked to get in arguments. He didn't like to fight. He was somewhat passive. And while me, I was powder keg, Of course, I'd established that. The one thing I don't talk about too much. I talk about this on my other videos when I cover transgender issues, how my hormones affect my moods, and sometimes the wrong person setting me off, I could somewhat times fly into a rage. And then there's that whole thing about me being a notorious black witch, which these days I'm not so much. I try to do good these days because, well, some people like my dear friend Roz found it amusing to let the rumors fly. It's not always so advantageous. I guess it depends on the personality. And for a while, some rumors and things worked to my advantage and others didn't. But Tamlyn tried to stay clear of all those controversies. He was a very quiet, very reserved individual. So quiet and kind of secretive that he, more or less, I mean, it was almost like I didn't know he was engaged to marry Tatiana the whole time. It's like he mentioned her once or twice in passing, and it was so brief and so vague in the reference that you'd almost miss it, if not forget about it. And I felt bad once I finally did get to meet Tatiana and got to know her a little. Felt very bad for her. And well, let's just say that in that final year of our friendship, their relationship had finally collapsed. And again, I can't go into those details. We hit on something very personal. But the only thing I can reveal is that one of the big things that he carried with him was this trauma from his mother's death. Now, if I recall, it was a suicide. This strange tale surrounding that suicide was that he was sleeping in late, and for some reason, and again, take this with a grain of salt, none of us were there, and I find this part very hard to believe, but this is the story he told. He woke up and found that someone had put her body in the same bed, and this freaked the shit out of him. I'm thinking, wait a minute, who would do that? Why? You know, who would do something like that? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. Unfortunately, I can't recall. Again, this is well over 25 years, so I can't really recall what was the circumstances of her death. But the trauma he carried from that had damaged him on such a level, and he internalized all this because he wasn't a person who liked to talk about his problems. We talk about music, we talk about my problems, how he can help me, and again, he was a very good soul. You know, his friends needed him. He was there. You know, I'd show up at LAX without a penny to my name to get back home, the final leg home. He'd show up, you know, if I called him, you know, it's good of him, or if I needed groceries. But, well, as I previously established, some people took far more liberties and far more advantage of him. And that's where we're going to pick up the tale and what led to the demise of our friendship. You see, after Tatiana had exited the scene, literally, I mean, she just not only packed up and left, I mean, she was living with Sean Brennan, and just literally, once they broke up, within a week, she was out of California. You know, she moved up to the Pacific Northwest and met some guy, and you know, a year later I'd hear from her, and she had dramatically changed her appearance and just disassociated everything from the world she lived down here. Kind of sad how that worked out, but she was happy. At least last I talked to her, she tried to convince me that she was happy. She finally got a baby girl, and that's one of the things she wanted, and it's one of those things that Tamlyn kept stringing around about because he did not want to have children. known a few people like that. I mean, I was too young when I had my first children, and I was very strong-armed, and I was like, I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do. I mean, my childhood wasn't so great. I mean, yeah, on some levels, yes, on other levels, no. And so, what kind of parent would I be? You know, I would just struggle in vain, and ultimately, I lost those kids. You know, courts back then always sided with the mother, always. And there was really no way to win. And even after allegations of abuse, neglect, and a host of other problems, but I won't get into that because, again, that's my business. So getting back to Tamlyn, after Tatiana left, Tamlyn started, I mean, he wanted to start going out with me to outside the goth scene, and I'd taken him with me to the Queen Mary, which was kind of a more or less a drag queen slash cross-dresser bar in the Studio City. It was a safe place for someone who didn't know their way, at least on some levels. Not always. There were plenty of predators to go around, and it used to kind of make me sick. I don't recall taking him to 7969. That would have been too intense for him. He was, as I tried to warn him, because he did ask if he could come with me, and I told him, and I, you know, because I was very close with him. You know, it's like I'm one of the few people he let me call him Henry, and I said, Henry, that scene is largely working girls. You make one fucking wrong move, and things can go bad there. I mean, that's a lot of, you know, some hardcore people, and a lot of Johns, and you're not ready for that shit, you know. And I mean, realistically, if you're not trans, it's really not a good idea for you to be there. So he was content for a while to go to the Queen Mary. He didn't go with me to drag strip or any place, the fun places, right? But you know, he wanted to explore, and during that time, we came across an old friend that I loosely knew from the Helter Skelter days, and please forgive me if you're watching, because it's been so many years. I've long forgotten their name now, because they were kind of briefly in my life, here and there, and then not. But they, a friend of ours from the goth scene, very androgynous, and today I would take the wild stab and say they were a little more like me, trans femme. Again, we didn't have the terminology back then. It just didn't exist. And like me, this trans femme who flirted with me heavily, and yeah, we'd be bad little girls in the goth club sometimes. You know, it's, you get drunk, you get high, and if you're somewhat attracted and there's a good ass flirtation, what the fuck not, right? I mean, but he did have a wife. I had a wife. Well, at that point I didn't have a wife. He also had children, and he had a house, and didn't know what he did for a living. It was one of those things I didn't want to know, because hanging out at the Queen Mary, you know, when I first started going out to clubs where male to female types, you know, congregated. First people I met, I made the mistake of hoping I could find someone somewhat mentor me that I could trust. And I got burned so hard by people and betrayed that I just quickly discovered can't make friends there, because everybody's living a lie there. And that was the difference between that club and, say, 7969 world that working girls were. There was no deception there. There was no delusion there. Those girls were fighting for their existence. And while I wasn't a fan of the electronic music, dance music that played there, or the vibe, or the people, I'd go there sometimes just so I could see the look in their eyes. These people, they had this pain you could see in their eyes that eclipsed my own. And perhaps, maybe that's why I went there. I'm not sure. I'm certain boredom kicked in now and then because, again, I was going to goth clubs, I was going to trance clubs, and everything in between. And sometimes it was just business. Well, getting back to our friend from this trance friend, it was the singer of a small little band out of Orange County. If I recall, they were from Tustin, and they went by the name Necrodolly. And again, sweet as pie, these people, very nice. And I run into them now and then, and of course, me now being single, you know, again, we kind of get a little naughty when we got drunk. Pardon me while I do the goth thing here. And sometimes when you see me smoke, it's because I'm either stressed or I'm talking about something that's right at difficulty. My friend was really struggling for survival. They were having a lot of hard times making ends meet. He had children. And, I mean, very androgynous, long black hair, but he was really short and always with black lips and very feminine, just like Roz, you know, and very, very flirtatious. If you were to cross Roz with Ollie from Specimen, I think you'd kind of find this person. And please forgive me, it's been so many years. But as I rediscovered this person, there was someone else. And this someone else was, I assume, was a runaway kid who probably didn't grow up in the goth scene, probably didn't grow up on our music, but would do anything to survive. Steal, manipulate, very cutthroat, this kid. And energy was really bad about him. I didn't trust him, I didn't like him very much. And frankly, I felt bad for my friend because they took him in. And this kid, who was known as David, okay, very androgynous kid, was lanky, skinny, long black hair, and you know, my guess was they weren't very goth looking until they entered my friend's life. Because as far as I could tell, there wasn't anything really goth about them. They were going along for a ride, and they were going to do whatever they could to survive. I understand some desperation, but you know, ethical lines, some people just aren't born with any. Now, what I will say of this person, I will say, I'm trying to do this without sound like I'm just bagging on this person. You know, what I'm trying to tell you is the truth, as we saw it, as we knew it, as how it went down. This person had essentially took over my friend's life, his family, and they wound up losing their home. And before you know it, they were all living out of their vehicle. I mean, this was sad. I mean, with nowhere to go. It was just, you know, this kid had somehow drained them of all their resources and was ready to move on. And because it bore resemblance to Tamlyn saw something in him. And because this kid, once they met, this kid overnight decided to start making himself up as Tamlyn, which kind of freaked me out a little, and I did not like this. In fact, anyone who was close to Tamlyn didn't appreciate this. We could see clearly that this kid was trying to move in on Tamlyn and play on his emotions. again, he had this weird thing about his mother, and of course this is one of the things that destroyed his long, almost 10-year relationship with Tatiana. And it was one of this weird pieces of baggage he carried with him. And no sooner that my friend from Neko Valley was practically homeless and fighting for survival, there was nothing more to steal, there was nothing more to drain, no more accounts, nothing. This kid latched onto Tamlyn, and Tamlyn, because he made himself up to look just like him, which I thought was fucked up of him to do, because he could see how vulnerable Tamlyn was. He fell in love with him, like instantly, and he just overnight just started going, "This is my baby," and he'd say this wimpy, little weird voice, and I'm like, Henry, what the fuck is wrong with you? He's just met this kid, he's this homeless kid, and I heard what he did to my other friend, and I tried to tell him. In fact, my other friend tried to tell him, and it's like, Tamlyn, don't let this kid in your home. This kid is going to fucking take every goddamn dime you have. He's a parasite. A human parasite. Not to mention, he's practically almost underage. He's so fucking young. I mean, well, did Tamlyn listen to my advice? No, he didn't. Just like with hormones, prior to this kid walking into his life, he finally started asking me about hormones. After 3 years of watching me shoot my hormones and take my pills, watch me go through the agonies of, mood swings and rages and all kinds of issues. Tamlyn finally asked me, can I take a shot? And I go, why the hell do you want to do that for? I said, well, I just want to know what it's like. I said, but you told me over and over again, you're afraid of needles. Why would you want to take estradiol? Well, maybe I'm transgender. I go, Tamlyn, this whole time we've been hanging out. We've been hanging out for three and a half years already. Never once have you really asked me much of anything, what it is to be like transgender. And now all of a sudden, you think you're transgender just out of the blue like that? I mean, I just didn't sound right at all. I mean, if you're transgender, you've known your whole life. You've known since age 4 or 5 that there's something very special about you, because we all have this strange thing. We kind of call it the awakening. We have these strange set of dreams that start to tell us that we are very, very different and very unique in the universe and this world. And while it doesn't make sense at age 4, eventually we remember this dream. We remember this experience, and we just kind of know. And in time, we learn what it means. We learn what we need to do, and what people have dubbed gender dysphoria. We embrace it and turn it into gender euphoria. But Tamlyn, he started hanging out with this kid behind my back, and they started going to places where other transsexuals start hanging out. Again, 3.5 years hanging out with me. Absolutely no interest in that stuff at all. And if you asked him what was his deal, he'd say, I'm a Klinefelter. Again, he would do this whole Klinefelter thing, which I didn't quite understand. It's today, you could probably identify it as more being a kind of a genderqueer, non-binary person, or they say NB, it's, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a little different. I mean, it's kind of on the spectrum a little bit, but it's not the same as being transgender. I mean, a person who's not transgender could take hormones and go through all the same shit, but in the end, they're going to be doing this for what reason? I mean, if your body isn't telling you that you need to do this, listen to some kid who's trying to convince you that you need to be like them so they can get their meds or money or whatever out of you is not a good reason to go on hormones. Now, I often joke because when I first started, I was, curious, and there was a part of me, I was more or less getting in battles with my then outgoing wife, and I used to joke that the one way to destroy dyna cancer was to become dyna cancer. Well, that kind of worked a little bit, but came at a cost. Tamlyn had very, he was androgynous and, a little curious about things, but he had no interest in trans issues or identified as trans. Sorry. It's because the fans are on here and it tends to go out. So no sooner did this kid who had wrecked our friend from Necro Dolly's life, was in his orbit. Within a month, he was living there. And to my dismay, he started answering the phone as Tamlyn, and I'd call up, I'd go, "Hey Henry, what's up?" And he's like, I'd hear what sounded like Tamlyn's voice, and he's like, "Who?" I'm like, "Excuse me?" And, "Oh, Tamlyn, yes." And I'm like, "The fuck?" I say, "Henry, is that you?" And "Oh yeah." I was like, I quickly realized that wasn't Henry. I said, "Put Henry on the phone. I'm not dicking around." And then, he passed the phone. David. Well, it seemed rather in a rapid pace. I started getting squeezed out because now Tamlyn had brought this kid who now started making himself up as Tamlyn, wearing Tamlyn's clothes. I went to go see him out of concern, and this kid answered the door, made up as Tamlyn, and pretended to be Tamlyn. And I said, "This is not funny. Don't ever do that again. I'll fuck you up." And it really pissed me off that he was doing this shit. And Tamlyn like, "Oh, don't be mean to him. He's my baby." And I'm like, "Henry, what the fuck has gotten into you? This kid is barely legal. This kid. Oh, her name is Anna now. You need to call her Anna." And I'm like, whatever. I'm just like, one of those things that kind of more or less, not the reason, but a contributing factor to my decision to walk away from the life, because after 9/11 hit, it became very hard. Well, the life was hard to begin with, but it got even harder. Downright impossible. And people in the trans scene just had this huge disconnect with what was going on. And, I came from a military family, so there was no way I could detach myself the way they could. We had this great moment, probably one of the coolest stories I had of me and Tamlyn together. We went to West Hollywood Pride, and with Demi, and Tamlyn looked like the damn child catcher from from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and with his he's rail thin, he's got this black umbrella, and he's wearing black sunglasses, and he's just smiling but not saying a goddamn word. I was like, "Henry, what the fuck is wrong with you?" Just crazy shit, and but probably our best memory, I do say this, and this one I will like to share with you. After 9/11, about 2 days after 9/11, there was a improvised vigil on Sunset Boulevard near where Tower Records was, and I had a American flag in my possession, and I said, "Hey Henry, you want to go to this thing?" It's like, we should show our support, and we have all new people that were either supposed to be in those towers or were, and so we were kind of deeply affected by the tragedy. And we went to this thing, and we carried this when it was like people made speeches, people lit candles, and And then I unfurl this flag, and Tamlyn decides to grab the other end of it. And before we knew it, people just start lining up behind us. And we just start walking. Next thing you know, there's about 700 people behind us. We're walking, and we decide to walk about 1,000 feet up Sunset Boulevard, past, from the Tower Records area all the way up to just past the Rainbow. And then we decided to turn around and back. And the whole way, everybody's traffic stopped. Everyone just started applauding. And when it was over, this woman came up to Tamlyn and I. We're all gothed out and stuff, but we were carrying this American flag, and we were leading this march. And said, "You two are the most beautiful human beings." And it really struck us both because no one had ever considered us human. We were always freaks. Tamlyn was a freak to his family. I was a freak to mine. We were freaks in the scene. We work in the film industry. We were freaks there. Just everywhere we were a freak. The first time someone acknowledged us as human beings, and it was beautiful. And it seemed like that beautiful moment became extinguished once David had entered his life. And little by little, that kid started taking over his life, and me and Tamlyn started to become distant. I went off hormones at that time. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make. It wasn't something I wanted to do. But again, life became so damn impossible. It was hard to get meds. It was hard to cross the border. And the country was afraid of being attacked again. It's a pretty messed up time. If you were alive and old enough to remember this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The country was scared. Every night on the news they'd have threat levels, and they were expecting another big World Trade Center attack, which never came. Eventually the war in Afghanistan would start, the invasion, and next 20 years of bullshit in the Middle East. But me and Tamlyn would just butt heads because Tamlyn would be complaining to another friend of ours, mutual friend of ours, our friend Monique, who was from Texas and then living, I guess, moved over to Tennessee at that point, and constantly complaining to her that he's starving, and I would hear about it, and I would contact him. I said, what the fuck's going on? What do you mean you're starving? You're not working? Oh, I'm working. Then why are you starving? Oh, because I had to get my baby. He wanted some clothes. And next thing I know, I start running into this little shit, now known as Anna. It started with just a simple black outfit. And before you know it, he's wearing lip service. And then before you know it, he starts getting into corsetry. And over time, in the next year or two, this kid is just wearing haute couture. I mean, really expensive shit. And bragging to everybody how they go out for steak dinners and drinks and all this stuff. And where's Tamlyn? At home by himself, moping. And I would try to reach out to him, and Tamlyn would. I said, "What's wrong, Henry? Would tell me what the fuck's going on with you?" He says, "I'm starving." I go, "What do you mean you're starving?" He said, "What's the last thing you ate?" He says, "Toothpaste." I said, "What the fuck are you doing? He said, "Well, my baby needed this, my baby needed that." And I'm like, God damn, I got so sick of the my baby. We went to go see Star Wars on May 5th, 2003. And we got into this huge old fucking fight over that fucking kid again. Because he was like begging me not to be mean to him. Not to be mean to Anna. Oh, my baby. I'm like, Henry, you didn't give a rat's ass about your girlfriend of 10 years, who you were engaged to be married to. I mean, you never talked about her. It was like she didn't exist. And then when you wind up breaking up with her, it's like it didn't matter. But this kid is just like got you fucked in the head. And now I'm hearing behind my back, because I really tried to discourage. I said, Tamlyn, unless you, gosh, this thing keeps going out. I mean, it's ridiculous. I said, you know, listen, I'm not trying to discount your experiences. Maybe there's something about you you've never disclosed, but you've not provided a shred of evidence to me that you are indeed transgender. You might have a little cross-dresser tendency. You might, maybe, I didn't see much evidence of that either. You know, I gave him some of my old clothes, but I didn't see any of that. And all of a sudden now he wants to be not only transgender, but he wants to go to Phuket and start getting surgeries. And I go, why do you want to do this? You know, you're not making any goddamn sense. And, well, let's give my baby convincement. And it's like, oh God, the little fuck again. Well, May 5th, we got into a big fucking fight over it. And I just fucking had it with him. And Tamlyn got angry for the very first time. I mean, he never got angry, but he got angry. So angry with me, he told me to fuck off. And in fact, he turned his back to me, gave me 2 middle fingers, and walked away. And I go, so that's it. That's our friendship. Almost 5 years hanging out together, and you trade me for some street urchin who's clearly sucking you dry like some goddamn human parasite. Go figure. Well, I would hear stories from time to time from Moni and others who would tell me the same thing. Tamlyn's moaning that he's starving, he can barely make rent and all this stuff. And meanwhile, Anna's out there living it up large. So it'd be about maybe another year or two, I'd run into her at the Hollywood Live Club. And this kid's wearing like $1,000 corset and this magnificent ball gown. And I mean, for a kid, it didn't work. Couldn't afford it. No way he could afford this stuff. And bragging that Tamlyn paid for it all. You know, and what a sucker Tamlyn was. And it just made me so angry. And this kid comes up to me and launches a robe and says, I took Tamlyn from you. And I'm like, do you really want to have this conversation? And he says, oh yeah, I do, because I won. You won what? I won Tamlyn. I said, Tamlyn was my friend. He's not a prize. He's not a human ATM. He's my friend. And you came between us. Again, I won. And this little shit had no sense of grace, just nothing. This kid really thought they got the better of me. I got so pissed off, you know. I looked at the full moon. It was over at the Hollywood Live Club, and it was in the outdoor section. And I was like, you still don't know who you're fucking with, do you? I'm gonna tell you this, because I'm getting tired of hearing how Tamlyn's starving and you're bragging that you're doing this to him. I want you to look at that full moon. Look at it very clearly. You will get to see 3 more just like it. And if you don't get the fuck out of his life, or stop robbing him, draining him, isolating him, controlling him, they'll be the last 3 moons you will see in your lifetime. Now, mind you, because I have heard people accuse me of it, I perform no ceremony. I invoke no deities, no powers, nothing. I just simply told her, get the fuck, stop fucking with my friend. Stop fucking his life up. Stop fucking with his head. Just find someone else to go, someone else's life to destroy. But get out, Tamlyn's. You've been fairly warned. 3 months later, Anna was dead. Do I feel any sympathy? No, I don't. Because of the human wreckage this kid had caused a lot of anguish. My friend from Necrodali, and who I've never seen again. And Tamlyn became a complete mess. I would not let this kid go. I mean, this kid, for years, I'd hear about it. He'd go to Phuket. He'd spend a lot of money on surgeries, and he wanted to become something he previously had no desire to be. You know, I mean, if someone really wants that, I mean, okay, but I mean, you have to have a motivation for it. I mean, for us, we've known this is who we are. I mean, Tamlyn was in the, let's put it this way, he was in the same building, but not on the same floor with us. And as far as I was concerned, he exhibited no behavior or tendencies or asked any of the usual questions or shared life experiences that most transgender people have. He had none of that because, again, as he likes to say, I'm a claim filter, as he would love to say. So sadly, we wound up not talking again. It'd be many years until rather recently. I think about 10 years ago, I ran into him briefly. I was over there on West Hollywood, and corner of my eye, I see somebody walking really fast at a weird angle that's anorexic with long black hair, and the only one person in the world I know who walks like that is a strange, silly walk this guy had. I don't want to say kid, he was fucking my age. It could only be Tamlyn. Tamlyn wanted to be the fuck as way away from me as possible, and it sucked because, unbeknownst to me, he had been asking about me about the whole time. He missed me. And I missed him too. The problem was, he was a stubborn Southern boy, and I'm a stubborn Latina. Pobre de ti, si me amargas. And neither one of us would admit where we went wrong in our friendship and how we could fix things, but he just could not have a conversation without bringing up that kid who seemed to be the catalyst for everything that started to go wrong in his life. And so it was no surprise when I heard when Tamlyn died, how he died. I think in our last conversation where we got into a huge argument, I boldly predicted, I told him, you go down this fucking path you shouldn't be on. One day you're gonna find yourself alone, sitting in a chair with maybe some drugs or booze next to you. They're gonna find your body long after you passed away, and it's gonna be a sad thing. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. They said he'd been dead for weeks. It was only the smell of decay that drew the attention. When I heard this news, I was deeply saddened because, as it was revealed, he was still asking about me. He still cared about me. And I still cared about him. I still do. And he really was a tortured soul. I mean, this whole trauma with his mother. He included me in about some other shit, like crap his father pulled. And yeah, you know, our fathers, you know, they came from an era that just couldn't accept who we were. And while we were similar in certain respects, and definitely on the God thing, absolutely, you know, we were very different, and yet relatable. He was a really good friend, and I miss him. And I'm, you know, years later, I mean, you know, prior to Tamlyn's death, I was a friend, and who also I had a dispute with. That we played in a band together for a good month, and we made some really good music. But then, you know, his business plan didn't agree with mine, and you know, but there I was at Tracy Michael's funeral. Big shit show. Every glam wannabe kind of turned into a fucking circus. That funeral, God, no one expected to see me there because we weren't talking. You know, he pissed me off, and we hadn't spoken for 6 months. And I said to him what I would later say to Tamlyn. I would walk up to his corpse and put my hand on his palm. I'd say to him, I am so sorry this happened to you, but more sorry that you and I could not resolve our differences while you were alive. I wish you had reached out to me. And later I would say the same with Tamlyn. I wish he had reached out to me, because all he had to do was just say, hey, can we just have a truce and be friends again? I would have gladly hugged him and done that for him. I don't want to compare him to Roz. I mean, that was a totally different friendship, and how I feel about Roz and how I feel about Tamlyn are very different from each other. Though, and I have other friends that have died, mind you, and not all on bad terms, but that's why you gotta do what you can to resolve your differences. Don't be so goddamn stubborn, because you never know. We're only here for so long. I must make like my Japanese wall scroll that reads in kanji. The leaf falls from the tree without anger. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. This hasn't been easy. And as Oban is upon us, I felt it. I must conclude this story and let Tamlyn be at peace. And perhaps maybe we'll see each other again. I do miss him. And again, another brother. And it's just sad we couldn't resolve our differences. And this is my truth, my story. This is what happened. And whether you liked it or not, it's not that important, but it's what happened. And I wish things would have been different for him. He didn't deserve to die the way he did. That was just so sad. My advice to you all, be good to each other. Please take care. And thank you for watching.